We're just going to be hanging out for the next hour, and I'm here to answer any questions you might have. So if you're already doing activism and there's anything you're struggling with, if you're not sure about how to respond to a certain argument, or you have questions about veganism, if you are not vegan yet and you have any questions, let me know. How to reply to someone who's convinced that buying organic meat is a first step into the right direction. You got to explain to them how this has got nothing to do with the kind of animal product that they're buying or how these animals were raised or treated, but the fact that these animals were being treated as objects and they were being used, abused, raped, tortured, and murdered at the end just for a sandwich or just for a snack. So it doesn't have anything to do with how these animals were treated. In terms of organic, free range, RSPCA approved, all of that, these labels are just created to make the consumer, that individual, feel better about their choices, but it doesn't make any difference to the animal. So to the animal, they just don't want to be killed for a snack, and they just want to be left alone to live their life. And that's why veganism is the only option. There is no steps towards it. We do understand that some people might think that they're going to take steps, so they go vegetarian first, or they consume less animal products, and the goal is veganism. But if someone has already made the connection that veganism is the goal, then you need to ask them, why are you taking little steps towards that goal? What's stopping you from just going vegan right now? Because again, eating less animal products or buying specific products such as organic or free range doesn't change the experience of that individual, that particular animal that they're buying and they're eating. I don't know how to reply when my dad says being vegan won't make a difference even to one animal. That's just factually wrong, because it's like saying if someone was to abuse you, if somebody convinced them that they shouldn't abuse you, physically abuse you, and they stopped, how does that not make a difference to you as the victim? And that's why what I was saying about taking small steps or making little changes doesn't make a difference. And the only way you make a difference is to be vegan, because that's the only way that you are actually creating change for those animals, those individuals. So when you've got an animal product in front of you, if you say no to it and you go for the vegan option, you have made a difference for that particular animal that was tortured, probably raped, and then murdered, chopped up, and they ended up on your plate. So every time you say no and you make a different choice, you're making a difference to that particular individual. And that's why it does make a difference to each animal. That's all you need to explain to your dad. Just make an example about how if somebody was to abuse you physically and they were convinced not to do it, how that would completely change your experience as an individual. These animals are individuals as well. They all are just one individual. It's not like all animals are like one entity. They're all just like humans. They're all individuals. How to balance between making people comfortable and open to conversation, but also uncomfortable with their actions? It's a really good question. I really like that. It's very interesting. I'm guessing you mean, like, for example, at a cube, or if you're just having a conversation with your friends or at work. So what you want to do is approach them in a way that they feel comfortable to have a conversation with you, but then you also want them to feel uncomfortable with their actions. So the second part is got nothing to do with you necessarily, because if you approached me and you pointed out something in my behavior, I would feel uncomfortable if I deep down believe that what I'm doing or I have been doing is wrong. So whether you attack me and you're being really harsh, or you're just very sweet and gentle, I'm still gonna feel that way. It doesn't really have anything to do with your delivery. What we need to work on as activists is to be direct with people and not water down the message, but also we want to be approachable, like you said. So that's something that we need to work on. So it's not just exclusive to doing activism, obviously. Like, you just want to be working more on your communication, so that at a cube, if you approach someone, your energy is in a way that that person wants to engage with you and they want to continue with that conversation. I mean, some of it has to do with that individual. Obviously, some people may not want to engage in a random conversation on the street with a stranger. So it's not all you. It's kind of 50% of it is with you and how you present yourself and how you continue with the conversation. And that's why asking lots of questions is good. So throughout the conversation, you want to ask appropriate questions so that you get the other person involved in the conversation, they're engaged, and then sometimes you need to just make a statement and let them know, explain something to them. But you want to do it in a way that you don't come across as preachy. You're not just lecturing someone because people don't like to be lectured. You get them engaged in the conversation so that they feel like they're part of that conversation. Like I said, the rest of it is up to that person. If I have done something and I have guilt in my heart and deep down I just feel guilty, then when you point it out, I'm going to feel guilty and it's going to be uncomfortable regardless of how you do it. Obviously, I don't think that animal rights activists should be aggressive and should be shaming people and attacking them. But you could be the sweetest person and you could be the most respectful, and that person might still feel defensive. Why? Because they feel that discomfort because of the guilt that they've been carrying. And you're the first person who pointed it out. And that's something that you cannot avoid, and you don't need to be avoiding that. That person needs to feel uncomfortable so that they can look at their actions and make change if they're ready to do it. I'm sure every one of us felt uncomfortable when we were faced with the truth when it comes to animals, and that's why we decided to change. So whether you watched a video that was really painful to watch and opened your eyes to the reality, or you had a really different kind of conversation with someone that helped open your eyes about, what animals go through, in both of those cases, you would have felt really uncomfortable because you would feel like my entire life I've been living a lie and now I need to open my eyes and just do it completely different. It's like living in a complete different reality. So of course it's going to be uncomfortable. But again, you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to try to avoid it. That's necessary. Is it okay to be vegetarian and not vegan? Because I think being vegan will be difficult for me. Vegetarian is simply a diet that means you don't eat the flesh of animals. You still consume dairy, eggs. You can still wear animal products. You can still buy things that are tested on animals. So it's just referring to your diet. Veganism is a stance you take against all forms of animal exploitation and animal cruelty, meaning anything that comes from an animal, any action or service or product that was made in a way that an animal had to be tortured for or had to be killed for, you try to avoid it as much as possible and practicable. So it goes beyond just a diet. And what happens in the dairy and egg industries is just as bad as what happens in the meat industry. So if you're someone who has come to the point where you're like, okay, I want to be vegetarian because I've seen what happens in the meat industry. These animals don't deserve to be killed, so I'm going to be a vegetarian. You need to look into what happens in the dairy and egg industries. The animals in the dairy and egg industries usually end up in the meat industry. Cows are raped in the dairy industry. Why? Because they want to use the animals as much as possible for their milk, for their flesh, for what comes out of their bodies. And then when the animal cannot go through the same process anymore, they send them to the slaughterhouse so that they can be killed for their flesh. And what happens in the dairy industry, again, after the cow gives birth, the baby is immediately separated from their mom. And this is standard practice everywhere. And what happens is that little baby calf will have a different life in terms of whether they're a girl or a boy. If they're a boy, they're going to be killed very soon, within a month, for their flesh. If they're a girl, they're going to have the same life as their mom. They're going to be used for their milk until they just can't go through the process anymore, and then they're going to be sent to the slaughterhouses again. In the egg industry, what happens is when the chicks are born, if they're male, because they can't be laying eggs, they're going to be considered as waste, so they want to get rid of all of them. So every time you eat or buy an egg, there would have been at least one, probably more, male chicks that were basically killed for that one egg. That's why you need to look into it a bit more to understand that really the dairy and the egg industry are just as bad, if not worse, than the meat industry. I don't think we can compare what these animals go through, but it's just as bad. Don't try to make yourself feel better by thinking, I want to eat their flesh, but it's okay for me to have a little bit of cheese or a little bit of egg because the animal didn't die for it. The animal does actually end up in a slaughterhouse, maybe not right away, because when you eat the flesh of an animal, you know that the animal was dead so that you can eat the flesh. In the dairy and egg industries, there is a bit of a process, so they didn't die immediately for that little bit of cheese, but they are going to end up in a slaughterhouse because you chose to buy that little bit of cheese. There is no point going vegetarian if you're doing it for the animals. Like I was saying at the start of this live stream, every animal is an individual. So while you might be thinking that you're saving some of these animals by not eating their meat or their flesh, you're still the reason why many animals in the dairy, egg industry, as well as other industries, if you still continue to wear leather, for example, if you wear animal skin, if you buy cosmetics and skin products that have been tested on animals, for example, every one of those individuals that was used in the process of making those products or was at the end killed for that product, you're responsible for. And that's why being vegetarian is not good enough for the animals. You need to put yourself in their position and think, would I want to be someone who is being used for 4 or 5 years for my milk or what comes out of my body, and then at the end I'm going to be killed for my flesh? How long are the cubes? And also, I'm 17 and don't have a cube close to me. The cubes usually go for 3 or 4 hours. There is no age limit, so you can definitely attend if you're 17. Even if you're younger, you can attend. If you can't find any cubes around you, what you can do is you can email us so that you can become an organizer in your area. If you want to find your local chapter, you just go on our website, cubeoftruth.com, and you'll see all the locations. You click on the closest chapter to you, join a Facebook group, and then you can attend. If you can't find any cubes around you, you send us an email to join@anonymousforthevoiceless.org, and our team will send you some information and they will train you and you basically become an organizer. The only thing is, because you mentioned you're 17, we do have an age limit for our organizers. We don't have an age limit for volunteers, so you can attend if you're 5 years old and you want to hold a sign. But to become an organizer, you need to be 18, so you probably need to wait another 6 months or a year, and then you can become an organizer in your area. Is it fair to expect a new vegan to break up with their non-vegan partner? To expect something is a bit vague. I don't expect anyone to do anything. Let's say you go vegan now and you've been with your partner for 2 years and neither one of you was vegan. You decide to go vegan, he doesn't go vegan. I don't expect you to break up with him. That's really up to you and your values. It only comes down to your values. Can you be in a relationship with someone who hasn't made the connection yet and may not ever make the connection? Some people are okay with that. I personally wouldn't be able to be okay with that. So if I was single right now and if I was dating, I would never be able to date someone beyond 1 or 2 dates maybe if they were not vegan. So it does happen. I know many people that go vegan and then they give their partner time, and then if the partner doesn't make the connection, then they break up. So I don't know what you mean by is it fair to expect. I think it's fair if that's your value. Nobody can tell you that's extreme or not enough. You know what I mean? If that's what you're trying to get at. I don't think that anyone can put any kind of label on this, because you get to the point where, like I was saying before, your whole reality changes. So of course your values are going to change. And I think that it's impossible when you have a core value, it's impossible to be with someone that doesn't have the same core value. So maybe some people would be flexible and give their partner some time. Some people may not be able to do that because they feel like they're disrespecting their own values, and that's fine, that's fair. How can you have a convo with a rape victim without getting them offended when mentioning animal rape? That's interesting. So I'm one of those people that thinks we shouldn't avoid using certain terms like rape, Holocaust, like slavery, words that accurately describe what these animals go through. I don't think that we should avoid it just because these words were used to describe a human experience. However, I think there's a time and a place, so I think overusing anything can be a negative thing. So if you're like constantly using the same word and it doesn't necessarily make sense. I know, like if I was talking to someone and they just kept using the same word and I'm not even in the same frequency, you know, because you're talking to non-vegans that are probably being faced with this issue for the first time, right? So I wouldn't be able to connect probably. But there is a time and a place, like I said. So for example, when you're describing what happens to the animals in the dairy industry, it is really important to say animals do get raped, and that's the truth. So I actually don't think that we should say artificially inseminated, because that's like a medical term, and that's used for humans that give consent to go through a certain process to get pregnant. So it doesn't make sense to use it for a cow that did not choose to be in that position. So it's definitely accurate and necessary to call it what it is. It is rape. However, you mentioned someone who's a rape victim. I personally think if you already know the person, then you need to really go with how well you know that person. Maybe that person would be really sensitive to that. Maybe you can work your way up with like how you're going to deliver the message. But if you're talking to someone who you don't know, I personally wouldn't shy away from mentioning that, okay? Even if I knew someone was a rape victim, I would think then you should really get it, okay? Then you can really relate to these animals, and I'm actually gonna say it. I do understand that that person might be overreacting to it because they might get triggered and they might have some trauma with that. That's why I was saying, like, if you know the person and you know how they work, you may want to avoid saying it in that way, and you may want to just say it differently until that person's ready to hear it. Like if I was in that position and I didn't know the person, I would definitely not shy away from saying it. I actually do believe that if you have that kind of experience, then you would be able to relate to the animals way better than the average person. So if I was raped or assaulted, physically assaulted, I would be able to be more open and understanding to the message, and I would be able to relate to the animals more. Yeah, that's my position on it. How not to snap at someone who says veganism is only a trend. It's hard to not snap at them, right? Because it's so dumb. That's what you mean. Well, explain to them how a trend would be, I don't know, eating a smoothie bowl every morning or riding your bike. I think it always helps to explain to them what veganism is, and this is how I explain to people. I say veganism is a stance that you take against all forms of animal exploitation. And then you can explain to them what that means. How is that a trend? Because we're talking about avoiding certain situations, certain products. Would you also say being anti-racist or being anti-sexist or being anti-child abuse is a trend? Because it's a matter of injustice that you're trying to address. When you take a position against an injustice, you're trying to address that injustice, right? So you want justice for those victims. Just like saying against racism, when you're vegan, you're taking that stance, and that's why it's not a trend. All right, I'm gonna wrap this up. I really appreciate you all joining me for this one. Thanks, Laura. All right, much love, everyone. Thanks for joining me, and take care.